For thousands of years, a huge portion of human history has been sitting on shelves, locked in a language that very few people can read. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of ancient Sumerian clay tablets holding the secrets of the world's first civilization, and they've been almost completely silent until now. What if I told you that new artificial intelligence is starting to translate these ancient texts, and that it's giving us a whole new way to look at the story of human origins, our gods, and a wild truth that some believe was deliberately buried? The history you were taught in school might be missing a few key chapters, and the proof is finally being unlocked. The story of humanity isn't what it seems, and the most ancient voices are finally starting to speak. Stick around as we explore the knowledge that has been out of reach for over 5,000 years. Deep in the dust of modern-day Iraq lie the ghosts of a civilization that feels almost impossible for its time. Sumer. More than 6,000 years ago, while most of the world was living in small, scattered settlements, the Sumerians just exploded onto the scene. They weren't just building villages, they were building huge, complex city-states like Uruk, Ur, and Eridu. They gave us the wheel, the sail, the 60-second minute, and the 60-minute hour. They gave us codified laws, complex bureaucracy, and epic literature. But most importantly, they gave us writing. Using sharpened reeds, they pressed wedge-shaped marks, called cuneiform, into wet clay, and they wrote about everything, from receipts for sheep and grain to grand royal decrees. They documented their entire world. This was the birth of human memory, a permanent archive of thought and history. Today, museums around the world hold over 500,000 of these clay tablets. It's a library of the first minds, the first kings, the first priests. But here's the problem. It's a massive one. Cuneiform is an incredibly complex script, and Sumerian is a language isolate, which means it's completely unrelated to any other known language, living or dead. For over a century, a small, dedicated handful of scholars called Assyriologists have been painstakingly working to translate these texts. It is slow, agonizing work. A single scholar might spend their entire career on just a fraction of this collection. As a result, the vast majority of these tablets remain untranslated, unread, and unknown. Think about that. The foundational chapter of human civilization, the stories of our very beginnings, are locked away in a silent library. We've had the tablets for decades, but we've only peeked through a few keyholes. We see these tantalizing glimpses of their world, their complex gods, their surprisingly advanced mathematics, their stories of great floods and heroic kings. But the full story has been just out of reach. What secrets have we been missing simply because we couldn't read it all? What if there were patterns hidden across tens of thousands of documents that no single human could ever hope to spot? For generations, this was the wall between us and our deepest past. But that wall is finally starting to crumble. The key to unlocking this silent library isn't a person. It's a new kind of intelligence. In the last few years, a quiet revolution has been happening in research labs. Teams at places like Tel Aviv University have been developing sophisticated artificial intelligence models specifically designed to help do what was once thought impossible: read and translate ancient cuneiform. This isn't science fiction. It's a real technological breakthrough. These aren't just simple translation apps on your phone. They're deep learning neural networks. Researchers feed these systems tens of thousands of already translated texts, allowing the AI to learn the patterns and grammatical structures of dead languages like Akkadian, which was also written in cuneiform. The AI learns to recognize the wedge-shaped symbols from 3D scans or photos of the tablets, transliterate them, and then translate them into languages like English. The results are staggering. Some projects have achieved high accuracy in translating specific types of Akkadian cuneiform. It's important to be clear. This technology is still developing and works best on formulaic texts, not complex poetry. It's a tool to assist human experts, not replace them. But it's a force multiplier on an incredible scale. Suddenly, the idea of translating every known tablet feels less like a fantasy and more like an inevitability. But this is where it gets really interesting. The AI can do more than just translate. It can be analyzed, it can cross-reference the entire body of Sumerian and Akkadian literature at once. It can spot recurring names and concepts across thousands of documents, from administrative records to religious myths written centuries apart. It can flag connections that no human researcher could ever possibly detect in a single lifetime. This is the new tool that could change everything. Think of the AI as the ultimate research assistant, working 24/7, finally allowing us to read the entirety of humanity's first library. It's giving us a bird's-eye view of this ancient world, and with that new perspective, old controversial questions are coming back with a new sense of urgency. Of all the mysteries in the Sumerian tablets, none is more controversial than the story of the Anunnaki. For decades, the mainstream academic view has been clear. The Anunnaki were the main pantheon of Sumerian gods. They were mythological figures representing the forces of nature. Enlil, god of the air, Enki, god of water, and Inanna, goddess of love and war. Their stories were seen as the way Sumerians explained the world around them. But this is where a much more radical interpretation, famously put forward by the author Zecharia Sitchin, comes into play. Sitchin argued that the Anunnaki weren't gods at all, but flesh and blood visitors from another planet. His translations, which are widely rejected by mainstream scholars, suggested these beings came from heaven to earth. He proposed that God was simply the only word an ancient culture had for a technologically advanced being who arrived from the sky. This is where the power of mass data analysis becomes so tantalizing. When you look across multiple texts, from the Enuma Elish to the Atrahasis Epic, Sitchin argued that a consistent story emerges, one not of spiritual creation, but of biological engineering. The tablets describe the Anunnaki gods growing tired of their labor and deciding to create a worker. The texts talk about mixing the clay of the earth with the blood of a god. They describe a chief scientist god, Enki, overseeing the project to create a primitive worker, the Lulu. Read as mythology, it's a beautiful allegorical story about humanity's place in the cosmos. But Sitchin asked, what if it's read as a pre-scientific description of a technical procedure? Is mixing essence a reference to combining genetic material? Are the failures and successes a retelling of trial and error genetic experimentation? These ideas were largely dismissed by academics as pseudoscience because the translations were ambiguous and the claims were too big. New AI tools won't prove these fringe theories right, but they could allow us to analyze the language and patterns that inspired these theories on a massive scale. It lets us ask the question again. Is this just a recurring myth, or a distorted memory of something else? If this journey into our hidden past is already making you question what you thought you knew, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. The rabbit hole only goes deeper from here. So, if you entertain this wild idea that humanity was engineered as a workforce, the next question is, a workforce for what? Why would an advanced race travel across the cosmos for that? Here again, the fringe theories of Zecharia Sitchin provide a very specific and very strange answer. Gold. Across countless administrative and economic tablets, gold is mentioned frequently. For centuries, historians assumed this was for decoration and worship. But Sitchin's controversial interpretation was that the Anunnaki didn't come for conquest, but for a rescue mission. He claimed their home planet, which he said the Sumerians called Nibiru, was facing an atmospheric collapse. To save their world, they needed to suspend fine particles of gold in their atmosphere to repair it. Earth was the treasure chest they needed to survive. Now, to be absolutely clear, mainstream historians and linguists state that this narrative is not explicitly found in any credible translation of the Sumerian texts. The name Nibiru appears in Babylonian astronomy, but it's typically associated with the planet Jupiter or the pole star. There's no academic consensus that it refers to a rogue planet with a 3,600-year orbit. The entire story of mining gold to save another world is Sitchin's theory, built on his controversial translations. This is where the potential of AI analysis becomes so compelling, not because it can prove Sitchin right, but because it could offer new context. An AI could analyze economic texts right alongside mythology. Could it detect a sudden, massive spike in resources dedicated to gold mining that doesn't align with any known war or temple project? Could it then cross-reference that with mythological texts from the same period that speak of the gods demanding tribute? This wouldn't be a smoking gun. It would be circumstantial evidence at best. But it forces us to ask, were the myths just stories? Or were they the mission statement for the entire human project? Was our first job really to toil in mines to save a dying alien world? Almost every ancient culture has a flood myth. A world-drowning deluge, a handful of survivors, a civilization reborn. We all know the story of Noah's Ark, but the book of Genesis was written long after the Sumerians recorded their own, more detailed version. In the Epics of Gilgamesh and Atrahasis, we're told of a massive flood sent to wipe the slate clean. For centuries, this has been viewed as a memory of a particularly bad overflow of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, blown up into a myth over generations. But what if it was a global event? The ancient texts don't just speak of rain. They speak of celestial events and terrifying battles in the heavens between the Anunnaki gods themselves. The Enuma Elish, often referred to as the Babylonian Epic of Creation, can be read less as a gentle creation story and more as a violent account of our solar system's history. It describes a celestial battle in which a primordial planet, Tiamat, was destroyed, with one half becoming the asteroid belt and the other becoming Earth. Is this just poetry, or is it a mythological account of planetary mechanics and cosmic collisions that had devastating consequences here on Earth? The texts describe some gods, like Enlil, wanting humanity to perish in the flood, while the god Enki secretly worked to save his creation. He instructed a man named Ziusudra, the Sumerian Noah, to build a great boat and preserve the seed of mankind. Was the Great Flood just a natural disaster that the gods watched from afar? Or was it, as some theories suggest, a direct consequence of their presence in our solar system. The tablets paint a picture of a universe that isn't quiet and empty, but is filled with powerful factions. The physical scars on our planet might just match the stories on the tablets more closely than we ever dared to imagine. Let's just pause for a second and think about this. If these alternative interpretations, which have been on the fringes for decades, gain even a little more texture from new analysis, it changes how we see everything. This isn't about proving that our gods were aliens or that we were born in a test tube. It's about the possibility that our myths are not just primitive superstitions, but are instead a distorted cargo cult memory of deeply traumatic events and powerful beings that our ancestors simply couldn't comprehend. The established academic world will and should push back. They will demand hard evidence, not just speculation. But the game is changing. The AI is not a fringe theorist. It's a data processing tool that can give scholars superpowers. It's unlocking the library for everyone, and the tablets are beginning to speak in their own words, on a scale we've never had access to before. The dam of silence, held back for so long simply by the sheer difficulty of the work, is starting to break. We began this journey with a silent library of clay and ended it with a thinking machine of silicon. The road between has led us through the very heart of our own creation story. A story of strange gods, a demand for gold, and a world-altering flood. These are not separate revelations. They are chapters in a single epic narrative that has been waiting for a reader. That reader, an artificial intelligence, has now arrived. This technology does more than translate words. It holds up a mirror to our civilization. In the reflection, we are forced to confront the most fundamental questions. What if our myths are not metaphors, but memories? What if our gods were not forces of nature, but architects of it? And what if our purpose, from the very beginning, was defined by the needs of another? Ultimately, whether you believe these are literal histories or powerful allegories, the challenge they present is the same. Grappling with these ideas forces a kind of civilizational introspection. It asks us to move beyond the simple stories we were told and consider a past more complex, more chaotic, and perhaps more profound than we ever imagined. The voices from the clay are no longer silent. They are an echo, asking us not just who we were, but who we dare to become, now that we know. The door is open. What we do with this knowledge will define the next chapter of the human story.